Good morning. If you are visiting with us, we are delighted that you are here, and we want you to be back every time that you are in the area. We simply love to have visitors, and I guarantee you before you walk out the door this morning, you're going to have a ton of people come up and say hello and acknowledge how proud they are to have you with us at church. We're so thankful that you're with us. We're also thankful for the number that we have this morning. I've had a really good response to our sermon series that we are currently studying as we talk about marriage and family. This morning we're going to talk about better communication in marriage. I think this is a very biblical topic. When you consider that the brother of our Lord wrote the epistle of James and spent a lot of time talking about the use of the tongue and how we need to be careful about the manner in which we talk to other people. The tongue is described as being an unruly evil that is full of deadly poison. And I think we can all think of instances in our lives where we have said things that we wished that we had never said. We wish that we could take them back. And I think one area where we need to have better communication is in the area of marriage. And I spend a lot of time helping people with communication in marriage. And I talk about pitfalls that happen in regards to communication patterns. I think that if we could get people communicating better in marital situations, a lot of the problems that we see in marriages would fade away. And what I mean by that is if you go through and you look at the top 10 reasons for divorce, every one of those reasons could very well be alleviated. Those problems could be taken care of if couples could learn how to talk to one another about the problems in their marriage. For example, money. Several years ago, money was the number one reason for divorce in our society. But if you can get a couple to sit down and talk about money, finances, and do budgeting, they can end up on the same page and be very successful in the finances of their home. Intimacy is one of the reasons that is listed as being one of the top 10 reasons for divorce. If you can get couples talking about that aspect of their marriage, then you can have people who work through their problems. Now, one of the things that I tell couples when they come to me to do premarital counseling is, I cannot prepare you for everything that you may face in life. There's no way. I can't look into a crystal ball and tell you exactly everything that's going to happen to you down life's pathway as a couple. But my goal is to give people the tools that they can use to work through marital conflict and have good, strong marriages. And so I want to talk with you about how to be a better communicator in your marriage. Number one, I would ask you to not assign nefarious motives to communications that occur within the confines of marriage. And I think one of the things that we've got to do is we've got to learn to be honest with one another. 2 Corinthians chapter 8 and verse 21 says, providing for honest things, not only in the sight of the Lord, but also in the sight of men. I've gotten to where I do a lot of counseling with people who are having marital problems as a result of an affair. And I don't know how I've ended up doing so much counseling in that field, but one of the things, if there's anything positive about that type of situation, it forces people who are in that setting to be completely and totally honest with one another. Now, the interesting thing is if you read some material on this, you find out that those who say that they went through a situation where there was an affair in their marriage, they would never recommend that for any married couple. It was one of the most difficult things in their marriage. But they say if they go through counseling, they get help, they work through the marital issues, that their marriage at the end of that time, that period of time where they're getting help, was much better than it was before. Because I think it forces people, it absolutely forces them to be honest with the problems that they're having in marital situations. And so in regards to judging motives, I would caution you to not jump to conclusions in regards to what it is that your mate is trying to say to you. We have situations where sometimes people just assume the worst about another human being when in fact that may not be the case. We must allow them to fully express themselves when they're trying to explain a situation or a point of conflict with us. I would add to that all of the communication that we engage in, we should not think that everything that they have to say to us is bad. That is, avoid making all communications and deeds negative in nature, especially when the intention is pure and good in nature. Have you ever heard that cliche, old cliche, that if you ever start disliking something about someone, pretty soon you hate everything about them? I see a lot of people who end up in that situation where there maybe is a conflictual issue, a thing or two that they don't like about someone, but then all of a sudden everything about that person is bad. John chapter 7 and verse 24, Jesus says, "Judge not according to the appearance, but judge righteous judgment." So we should not assume that when our mate is talking to us that everything they have to offer to the conversation is bad right off the bat. But I see couples who get into that kind of rut, that no matter what is being said, no matter what is being done, the other party cannot win because it's always viewed as being negative, even when it's a positive thing. And I think that goes back to the mindset that a lot of people have, regardless of the communication situation that they are in, that everything about life, everything that they reason is negative in nature. We should not develop that sort of view when it comes to marriage and family. I would add to this, in regards to communication, we need to be careful and deal with one problem at a time. That is, avoid dealing with multiple conflictual issues at one time. Now, why I say this is, if you don't deal with one thing at a time, the person that you're trying to communicate with can become very confused and overwhelmed with the issue that you're trying to present. You'll have someone, and maybe they've had a rough day. You come home, and your wife is at wit's end because the kids have just run amok in the house. And so you walk in the door, and every problem that faced that household during the day, you're hit with immediately. And you have a husband who walks in from work, and maybe he's had a rough day too, and he's hit with so many problems at once that he doesn't really know where to start. We must be careful when we are dealing with conflict in marriage that we deal with one problem at a time, because you end up making your mate feel overwhelmed in regards to what it is that you are laying at their doorstep. And I say that also because it can cloud the real issue. It can cloud what the problem really is in the marital conflict. In Proverbs chapter 21 and verse 19, the writer of Proverbs says, "It is better to dwell in the wilderness than with a contentious and angry woman." Now, I could reverse that and say it is better to deal in the wilderness than with an angry and contentious man. And I think the opposite would be true of this passage. If you need a scripture that lists a man as being contentious, look at Proverbs chapter 26 and verse 21. "As coals are to burning coals, and wood is to fire, so is a contentious man to kindle strife." We need to be careful that we deal with one problem, that we offer one problem at a time. And I don't know about you, but when I communicate with someone, if they hit me with 5 or 10 things at once, it can be very difficult to deal with all of it because I tend to forget things. I don't know how it is with you. And I've noticed as I've gotten a little bit older that it becomes harder to remember things that happen from time to time. And so if I am hit with 5 or 10 issues all at once, then I may forget 2 or 3 of them and maybe never get around to dealing with what the real problem or the real issue of conflict is in that situation. I would add to this, avoid pulling additional parties, that is, children, in-laws, and friends into conflictual situations. The Bible teaches, as we read in Matthew 19, 5 through 6, that marriage is a leaving and cleaving situation. Again, that passage which was read says, "And said, for this cause shall a man leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife, and they twain shall be one flesh. Wherefore they are no more twain, but one flesh. What therefore God hath joined together, let not man put asunder." The primary unit in the family system is the husband and wife. And as Jesus says here in Matthew 19, it is a leaving and cleaving situation. And what I mean by that is you can have people who are interlopers in marital situations who create great problems. I was talking with a friend of mine several years ago, and she had indicated that her mom and dad were having problems, and the father came to her and said, "I want to let you know you have become an issue in our marriage because you are in our business, and you need to stay out of things." And she said, "I understood at that moment that I had crossed a boundary, that I had ventured into an area where I should not be. We'll talk about this further in just a moment in regards to children, but you can also have situations in marriages where parents can create problems and issues. Maybe they bring up things or they enter into areas in marriages where they should not be. Now, please don't misunderstand me. I think it's okay to go to mom and dad occasionally and maybe get a little bit of advice about something that's going on. But as far as a mother-in-law, a father-in-law, or a mom or dad constantly being in the marital strife and in the middle of those situations, it's not a good thing. And the reason I say that is because it's hard enough for two people to communicate. But when you put 5 or 10 in the situation, you're talking about a really complicated communication pattern. And so we need to make sure that we do not pull additional parties into our marital conflict. Again, the primary unit is the husband and wife, and no person should become an interloper into that family unit. I would add to this, when you have disagreements and arguments, do not have major arguments in front of your children. Do not have major arguments in front of your children. Now, a little bit of history about me. I never remember hearing my mom and dad have an argument, not even once. But I don't really think that that was necessarily a good thing. I think my mom and dad had an excellent marriage. But I do think there were times when my mother wanted to say something to my father about something that was going on, and she just didn't do it. And so I think we need to communicate, even when communication is not always a lot of fun. You'll have people come in and they're in an argument, and it'll be a situation where they think the world is coming to an end, their marriage is about to fall apart. And that may not necessarily be the case. Sometimes when you are in the middle of an argument, it means that your mate wants to have greater intimacy with you. And when I talk about intimacy in that context, I'm talking about getting to know one another on a very deep personal level. That's what I'm talking about. And so arguments are not always a bad thing, but when it comes to how you argue, you do not want to put your children into the middle of major conflictual issues. Now, having said that, I do think your children need to hear you disagree, because they need to understand that mom and dad are human beings. They make mistakes, but they make every effort to work through those mistakes in a mature and Christian sort of way. When we had our first argument, I said, what in the world's going on here? Because I'd never heard my parents argue. And it may sound crazy, but I really did not know how to have an argument with my wife. Now, Jada's family, they had arguments and they worked through their issues. But my family, I had never heard mom and dad argue, not even once. I was an only child. I never had any arguments with my siblings because there were no siblings to have an argument with. So I had to learn what it meant to have a conversation with my wife and how to work through our issues. I think one of the best things that I did for my marriage was, after we had been married for about 2 weeks, I took a marriage and family therapy class at Freed Hardeman that was taught by Sammy Jones, and I thought, this is great. I get this now a little bit, I understand it. But your children need to understand that mom and dad are going to have issues and that there are going to be disagreements, but mom and dad work through those problems. Again, avoid having major arguments on mature subjects in front of your children. One argument that you don't want to have in front of your children is about sexuality. Another argument might very well be about money issues. There are certain things that should not be aired out in front of your children, but they need to hear small disagreements and learn how to work through those issues so that one day when they marry, they know what it means to talk with their mate about problems in the marital situation. Going further, do not share all the details of your disagreements with everyone in the family. That is, avoid pulling your family members, that is, children and parents, into conflictual situations. Children should never be in the middle of your marital issues. Sometimes you have a situation where maybe the wife is angry with the husband, and so she starts talking with the daughter about marital conflict as a result of forming a coalition against the husband to force change in his life. If you've got a problem with your mate, you need to go and talk with them. Now, again, it's not wrong to go and get advice, maybe from mom, dad, mature Christians, maybe even from the elders. But to use your children or family members in conflictual issues to force your mate to change is not a healthy situation. As a matter of fact, in certain marriage and family theories, this is a situation called triangulation. And it's not healthy for a spouse to use a third person to ally against their husband or wife in marital conflict, especially if it is a member of the family. I don't know about you, but there are things that I would not want aired out to my in-laws, mistakes that I've made that are embarrassing. And if that was shared with someone, it could create huge embarrassment. I want it to remain between my wife and myself so that we can work through that issue and not feel like that I'm going to be embarrassed every time that I walk into my in-laws' home, or she be embarrassed when she walked into my parents' home if they were still with us today. And so you need to avoid pulling other family members into marital conflict. As I state here, I believe it can result in more anger and embarrassment for the one who has the coalition formed against them. Going further, we need to avoid interpreting neutral issues as negatives. We need to avoid interpreting neutral issues as negatives. An example might very well be church conflict. I've heard it said, and I think it's probably true, that if you want to see a church split, remodel the building. And what I mean by that is somebody says, well, we want to put new carpet in, or we want to buy new books, and we want to put new padding and cover on the pews. And so you form a committee, and they say, well, I think we ought to go with red. I mean, that's the scriptural color, isn't it? Somebody says, no, we want to go with blue. Well, and then they get into this big argument, and really, that's not a book, chapter, and verse issue, is it? Is it unscriptural to have red carpet in the church building? No. Is it unscriptural to have red, green, purple, paisley? No, it's not. And that is a neutral issue in regards to that type of discussion. And there are neutral issues that occur in families, in marital conflict, that can really blow up and escalate to a point of being ridiculous, okay? And we need to realize that if there is no real moral issue or real hurtful issue attached to the conflict that's being brought up, we need to realize that it's a neutral issue, that it has no overarching importance. That is, they boil down to a matter of preference or opinion. Proverbs chapter 26 and verse 20 says, where no wood is, the fire goeth out. So where there is no talebearer, the strife ceaseth. In other words, don't go out looking to pick a fight with your mate over an issue that really doesn't matter. And I see that occasionally, where someone is so mad and so irritated with the person that they are married to, it is a non-issue, but they want to make it an issue because they are mad at their spouse about something that is totally unrelated. Something that's totally unrelated. And so instead of dealing with the issue, it's easier to be mad about everything else rather than what the real conflict is about. I think this is an important concept, not just in regards to marriage and family, but in the society that we live in as well. We need to avoid personal attacks when discussing grievances. That is, it is possible to disagree with someone without being disagreeable. Do you know what I mean by that? And I see this a lot in social media settings, where there's someone who gets on Facebook or Twitter or whatever, some of those social media settings, and they have a strong view. Maybe it's a political view. And they get on there, and maybe to their credit, they express it in a very kind, loving sort of way. And then somebody gets on there, and they're just mad, and they start calling this person names, and they become very ugly with this person because they have an opposite view that's equally and emotionally held against what it is that person has posted. And so you have a situation where they could agree to disagree over the issues that denigrates into a situation where they just can't stand one another, okay? And I've seen that happen a lot on social media. And I tell people, look, I'm happy to talk with you about any topic, but when you start getting ugly with me and start calling me names, then I'm not going to talk with you anymore about it, because I can be mature in the type of conversations that I have with you without calling you a name and without mistreating you. And I see that sometimes in marriage and family situations. So I have this comment. As a marriage and family counselor, I've heard people say things to one another that most would never consider saying to a complete stranger. Treat your mate with respect, love, and dignity. I'll have somebody come in and they say something horrific to their mate. And I'll look at that person and say, if you were walking down the street and you came into contact with a stranger, or maybe you're in a waiting room and there's a stranger sitting by, would you say that to that person? And unanimously over the years, the answer has been no. But those same ugly things that we would never once think about saying to a stranger, married couples sometimes say to the person who should mean the very most to them in their lives. You can disagree with your mate without being disagreeable. I can disagree with Jada and not take shots at her that are personal in nature. That brings me to this point. Do not use your intimate knowledge of your mate to become disagreeable in a conflictual issue. What I mean by that is, my wife knows more about me than any other person on the planet. She knows the things that really bother me, the things that really get under my skin. Maybe she knows some of the personal issues that I struggle with, okay? And let's say, for the sake of argument, that I had a real problem with the fact that my hair is falling out. I don't care. It doesn't bother me. But let's say that she knew that it really bothered me to be losing hair follicles. And so we're in the middle of an argument, and she says, well, you're just a fat, bald man, and you wouldn't understand anyway. Okay? Well, she would have used intimate personal knowledge about me to be ugly and disagreeable in an argument. Now, again, it doesn't bother me. I figure hair falls out, save a lot of money in shampoo, you know. That's a good thing. But if it did, and she used that against me, she would have become disagreeable in a disagreement. You can have an argument and disagree with your mate without being ugly with them. That's the point. Proverbs chapter 25 and verse 11 says, a word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in pitchers of silver. We need to be careful about the words that we use. I would add this: do not have public arguments. Public arguments can be extremely embarrassing. We were in Walmart one time. Everything happens at Walmart. You ever noticed? You want to go out and have some entertainment, go to Walmart late at night. You'll see something there that amuses you, I promise. Everything happens at Walmart. So we're at Walmart. We're standing in line. We were at the deli counter. We were getting some ham sliced. And I don't know what was going on, but it was clearly a man and his wife standing there in front of us. And the wife started chewing him out. And I didn't listen, but man, I could tell she was mad about something. So she started chewing her husband out. And I felt embarrassed for that man, because he didn't know what to say, and his face turned as red as a beet, and he walked out of the store after they paid and left. And I don't know what happened in that car, but I hope he made it home alive. Follow what I'm saying? Do not have an argument in public. Now, it could be that your mate does something in Walmart or in some other public setting that embarrasses you thoroughly. When you get in the car and you want to have an argument with them, let them have it. When you get home and you want to have an argument with them when the kids are not in the back seat, talk with them about it. But don't air out your public laundry for everybody to know and learn about in a public setting. This would also include social media pages. I've seen entire marital conflicts played out on Facebook. And to scratch my head and think, why in the world are we talking about this? I don't want to know about your marital issues in this setting. This is my little world. Stay out of it with that, you know. But people will do that. They'll get on there and they'll say the most hurtful, disgusting things about their mate as a means of perhaps exacting revenge or justice against some perceived injustice that they've committed against them. You don't need to do that in a public setting. You need to have your disagreements in private, and you should never be willing to air out your dirty laundry in such a setting. I would add to this, avoid allowing your anger to linger for an extended period of time. The Bible teaches us that we are to avoid this very thing. Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 26, be ye angry and sin not, let not the sun go down on your wrath. One characteristic of a strong marriage, a strong married couple, is that they work together to work out their disagreements at the earliest possible convenience. And what I mean by that is, if the husband or the wife does something that makes the other one mad, they talk about it in an immediate fashion, instead of allowing it to build up over a period of several months or several weeks. This is a thing that is called gunny sacking in marital relationships, where you have this issue that's really bothering you. But instead of dealing with it on the day that it happens, you put it in an imaginary bag so that 10, 15, maybe even 20 years down the road, the bag spills over and everything that you've been storing away comes spilling out. And the husband or the wife, they're sitting there, they're scratching their head and they're saying, I don't even know what you're talking about. And I'll tell you the truth when I say this, I do well to remember last week, let alone last year and what happened last year. So if you don't talk about it in an immediate fashion, your spouse has some expectation, some reasonable expectation of saying to you, I don't even remember that, I don't know what you're talking about. We've got to talk about it in an immediate fashion. The Bible says, do not let the sun go down on your wrath. That means if you've got to stay up all night to fix it, you need to do it. We've had one or two arguments like that in our marriage in 22 years, where we've stayed up all night to work through our issues. Now, don't get the wrong idea. We're not headed to divorce court. Don't get that rumor started. I'm real happy. I believe Jada is. You'll have to talk to her later about that. But the point is, you work through your problems no matter how long it takes, and you reach some sort of resolution, rather than allowing things to build and build and build until the tension becomes unbearable in the marital situation. And then finally, I would add to this, never, never, never hit one another in the middle of a heated argument. This goes for men and it goes for women as well. Now, I say that because typically when we think of spousal abuse, we think of men hitting women. Men don't ever do that. Don't ever do that. I've dealt with that in marriage and family therapy settings, and it's not a pleasant thing. But it also happens with women hitting men. Now, statistically, it's less predominant. I forget the exact number, but I want to say it's maybe 2%, 3% of men are battered by their wives. But it does happen. We should never revert to using physical abuse to make our point or mistreat our mates. This passage in Ephesians 5:28-29, so ought men to love their wives as their own bodies. How do you treat your body? Do you throw your body up against a wall? That's what I want to do. I want to take a hammer and hit my finger. No, you don't do that. You want to take care of your body. You don't want to mistreat it. He that loveth his wife loveth himself. For no man ever yet hated his own flesh, but nourisheth it and cherisheth it, even as the Lord the church. There is never, ever an excuse for hitting your mate. It's just not. And it should never reach a point where an altercation becomes physical in nature. And as human beings, we should always be able to work out our problems without reverting to physical violence. I want to tell you, we have just touched the hem of the garment in regards to marriage and helping you develop your marital status to make it better. And so we're going to have a few more lessons over this topic. When I started, the elders here at Hillcrest asked me to give a list of the sermons that I would be developing, and I have found that this series is going to take a little bit longer than I had originally intended. But the point of this is to help everyone here, everyone listening on Facebook, have a better marriage. That's the point. And again, as I stated when we began this series, if we can have better marriages and better families, we can have stronger churches and a stronger society. And that's the goal in this. Again, the best thing you can do for your marriage is be a faithful child of God. And I hope you're doing that. I hope you're leading your life in a godly sort of way, because that will make you, right off the bat, a better husband, a better wife. But if you're not a child of God, if you're not a Christian, you need to put Christ on in baptism, and you need to live a Christian existence, because that'll make you a better person, period. Or if you've become unfaithful, maybe the situation in your marriage has denigrated to the point that you just don't know what to do anymore. I think the first step is to ask for prayer and to ask God to enter into that marriage in such a way so as to bring about good, positive change. If you need to respond to the invitation, whether you need to be immersed or if you need the prayers of this body of believers, will you not come forward as together we stand and sing this song of invitation?